excited to be hosting the 15th session of our webinar series, Masters of Conversion, where you get to learn from the masterminds of winning website experiences. I'm your host, Deeksha, and I am the optimization consultant at VWO, a full funnel experience optimization platform. With me today is Rohan, the product manager for Marketplace at Yelp. Of course, Yelp doesn't need an introduction. It's a platform that connects people with online businesses. I'm really glad to have you here, Rohan.
Thanks for having me here. Awesome.
Perfect. Perfect. So before I pass on this mic to Rohan, I just wanted to inform you that we have reserved some time at the end of this session for a Q&A session. So send in your questions whenever you have one using the questions panel, and we'll take them in the end. With that, Rohan, the stage is all yours.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So let's get the ball rolling. The Yelp story, building an experimentation program from the ground up. Hi, I'm Rohan. Firstly, some quick introductions. As Deeksha just mentioned, Yelp is a local search engine. Our job is to connect people with great local businesses, essentially businesses like restaurant owner, plumbers, electricians, so on and so forth. So if you're looking for a business owner, you should definitely check out Yelp. I'm a product manager at Yelp. I work in the Yelp Home and Local Services marketplace, where I build connections between consumers and local services business owners like plumbers, electricians. Prior to this, I was the product manager for metrics and experimentation. I was the first dedicated hire in the role. I joined the company at a time when we were making a decision whether you want to buy a platform or build one. We were trying to set up this new experimentation program, and that is exactly why I'm here to tell you this story. These are some of the organizations I've been associated with in the past. I went to grad school at Georgia Tech, go Jackets, worked at a consumer team in Yahoo, worked as a researcher at Andrea, and an engineer at Dell before. But more importantly, why are we here today? We're here to talk about the story of A to B. This figure summarizes the evolution of the Yelp experimentation program. The x-axis is the timeline, and the y-axis is the number of experiments being started at any given point of time. I joined the company at A when there was no standardization, no single platform. There was experimentation wasn't a democratized process. And we took it all the way to B, where there was all of the standardization, we had an internal platform, and experimentation was truly democratized at Yelp. So how did we go from A to B? We focused on 5 pillars: establish baseline, integrate technically, boost trust in platform, faster time to value, and integrate culturally. Except the first one, the other 4 can be done in parallel. Before I dive into all of them individually, let's talk about what experimentation at Yelp looks like right now. What does state B look like? We've always had extensive experimentation needs. We conduct randomized tests, non-randomized tests, feature rollouts, dog food changes. Essentially anything and everything under the sun. For a company of Yelp's scale and size, running experimentation at an accelerated pace is very, very important to maintain its moat. With the growing footprint of the company and the growing footprint of our experimentation needs, we decided to invest in an experimentation program, which gave birth to the idea of Bunsen. Bunsen, as in the Bunsen burner. Bunsen is the name of the internal experimentation platform. The mission of the product is to be the one-stop shop for all experiment creation, deployment, analysis needs at Yelp. Bunsen has enabled shipping multiple winning features. The growth team found out that adding users' names boosts people adding preferences. The reviews team found out that new push notification copy led to users writing more reviews. And the consumer team found out that adding popular dishes boosts menu activity. And Bunsen made it possible to test all of these at an accelerated pace in a statistically sound environment. And that is exactly what my team and I work day and night to achieve. However, for you to appreciate why I'm so excited about where we are right now, what state B looks like, you need to understand what the world before Bunsen was like. What was state A? And if I had to use one picture to summarize it all, this would be it. I'm going to give it a couple of seconds to soak. You could drive. You could go from X to Y. However, your safety was dependent on other drivers as well. There was no organization. Similarly, you could experiment. You could make decisions. The validity of your experiment was dependent on how other people were experimenting, and there was no process around these things. As I mentioned, we've always had extensive experimentation needs. However, all of those were being conducted in independent silos. Team X did not know what Team Y was working on. They did not know each other's impact of each other's experiments on their products. And all of this led to wasted effort. Just analysis took 7 to 14 days. This was in addition to coming up with an idea, building the experience, setting up the experiment, launching it, deploying it, and then the analysis. And if something would go wrong, you do all of this again. And needless to say, all of this was leading to slowing down a product velocity. And at a company like Yelp, slowing down a product velocity is just not acceptable. So how did Bunsen achieve 2x statistical accuracy and a 10x volume of experiments? First up, when I joined the company, I set out to establish a baseline. I wanted to understand the current state of affairs and identify opportunities in the process. I broke down the Yelp experimentation program into 4 primary parameters: volume, performance, health, correctness. Number of experiments per quarter. How sophisticated were our computation leads? Were we conducting 10 experiments a quarter or 10,000 experiments? This educated the sophistication of the computational layer that we needed to build with Bunsen. Mean time to results. How much time did it take for someone to come up with an idea and have the experiment results in front of them to be able to make a decision? This is what my team and I was striving to reduce at Yelp. Uptime and failure distribution. Of all the isolated pieces of infrastructure that were floating around in Yelp, did they break? How often did they break? And if they did, what was the reason? How could we fix that? And finally, proportion of statistically correct decisions. This became the operational North Star of the experimentation program. This is the metric my team was striving to improve. What percentage of decisions was statistically correct at Yelp? With a baseline in mind, I broke down the Yelp experimentation journey into a 7-step process and identified the stakeholders in all of these steps. Conducted several interviews to understand what problems were these stakeholders facing. Where did the opportunities lie? What were the frustrations? What was going just fine? You need to understand that building an experimentation program is a non-trivial investment. Till now, we've invested millions of dollars and hundreds and thousands of hours to be able to be where we are right now with respect to experimentation. You want to ensure that you're moving in the right direction. Because if you're not, you need to stop right now and course correct. And this exercise gave me a stack ranked list of priorities. With those list of priorities in hand, I set out to integrate technically. I wanted to ensure that people had clear and easy to interpret results. Decision-making at Yelp was prompt and accurate, and experimentation at Yelp became a self-serve process. In Q1 2019, we launched an experiment scorecard. A scorecard was a singular UI which contained all the information anyone needed to make a decision on an experiment. Prior to the scorecard, there was no standardization on how experiment results were shared. They were living in SQL statements, Jupyter notebooks, they were all over the place. Teams really struggled to communicate experiment results or read each other's results. We built the scorecard. We gave people a de facto way to share results. We gave people a shared language. Now you can pick anyone in Yelp, show them the scorecard, ask them about any component in the screen, and they'll be able to tell you what that means. We launched a scorecard, people found a de facto language, they saw value, and we saw an uptake in adoption on Bunsen. One of the biggest problems with respect to experimentation at Yelp has always been either not having an adequate sample set or having way too big a sample set, which is to say that people kept on running their experiment needlessly, which led to wastage of resources. We launched an automated power analysis tool, which allowed people to figure out the exact sample set they needed upfront. If you were trying to stop the experiment before you receive adequate power, it will not let you do that. And if you continue to run the experiment unnecessarily, it will alert you of that as well. The power analysis tool helped us bump up the correctness metrics significantly. We wanted to make experimentation a democratized process at Yelp. We figured out early on that in order to make experimentation a democratized process, we needed to invest in great documentation. We needed to make it as easy for the execution team to, which is to say engineers and data scientists, to move on to Bunsen. We invested in a dedicated documentation tool and added an advanced search on top of it. This tool solved two purposes. One, it acted as a guide for experimentation. Second, it helped the execution team understand how they could hook up their tech stack on top of Bunsen. Bunsen documentation helped reduce the support requests my engineers were getting significantly. We figured out the baseline, built all of this technical infrastructure, and we started doing a roadshow. We started asking people to move on to Bunsen. But in a way, we were asking people to give up all the control that they have in their world and move on to this black box platform, which they did not know anything about. To tackle that problem, we set out to boost trust. We built safeguards, added cross-team intelligence, and increased transparency. This was to ensure that people didn't go off the rails. They were comfortable with the large volume of experimentation that was suddenly happening at Yelp now and knew how good or how bad Bunsen was. We launched a product called Bunsen Pre-Checks. This was a product which essentially, before an experiment was launched or in the early days of an experiment, ensured that an experiment passed all the pre-checks for it to be deployed in front of the consumer. Pre-checks such as data getting logged, metrics getting computed, there are no invalid metric queries. Prior to this, you would have to continuously write that SQL statement or refresh your Tableau dashboard to be able to see if things were working just fine. But now you could go sleep in peace. Bunsen pre-checks would send you an email if anything would go wrong. You wouldn't have to wait days to figure this out. You would be able to find out about things right away, fix it much early on in the process, course correct, and the overall product velocity increased. Guardrail metrics. This, by all means, has been one of the most impactful products my team has built at Yelp. Guardrail metrics are the most important metrics for Yelp. These metrics are computed over every single experiment, every single day, over billions of events. If an experiment violates a guardrail metric, the experiment owner and the metric owner have to meet to discuss trade-offs. And they cannot ship the experiment before these trade-offs have been resolved. And these thresholds of violation are a heuristic number which are defined by the guardrail metric owners. I work with the product leadership to define the entire product portfolio of Yelp into metrics, and we end up having 19 of them. Guardrails have helped us avoid multiple losing features. The ads experience team found out that a new ad format affected ad revenue and did not roll it out. The search team found out that a buggy infrastructure change was affecting the search experience during the experiment because a guardrail metric was violated and rolled back the experiment. And the local services team found out that new design was actually decreasing the number of local services projects being created and did not roll it out. And all of this allowed us to save millions of dollars in revenue. Bunsen Health. In order to give people insight and confidence into how efficient or not efficient Bunsen is, we built a product called Bunsen Health, which gave people visibility into Bunsen internals. You would find out if Bunsen was not working, if Bunsen was degraded, you could sign up for automatic notifications and get the confidence of moving on to Bunsen and be alerted if anything was going wrong. Now we were done boosting trust, giving people the confidence, parallelly, we were also focusing on faster time to value. We took this build, measure, learn cycle at Yelp, which took 7 days, and reduced it to under 24 hours. This process of build, measure, learn at Yelp involved a lot of manual analysis, ad hoc infrastructure setting, and creating cohorting and all experimentation infrastructure again and again and again. And things were obviously, because we've been created again and again, they were not standardized or not robust. But we took all of that and took it under 24 hours. We automated all of this process. If there was anything that was going wrong, you would find out about it daily. If there was everything that was going right, you would find it out within the day. We also put a lot of effort we also improved the developer experience by a lot. We were not just trying to build the best experimentation platform in terms of like the statistical soundness, but we also wanted to ensure the developer experience was great. We wanted to see how difficult was it for developers to move on to Bunsen. We built dedicated libraries for all technologies that existed at Yelp for people to integrate their tech stack into Bunsen. You could integrate into Bunsen with just 2 lines of code. You could get going. That's how simple it was. Last but not the least, integrate culturally. This has by all means been the hardest thing I've had to do at Yelp. I wanted to educate to up level, standardize the pre-experiment process, and monitor decision accuracy. We launched an experimentation training program. In a couple of months, we saw 95% of the product managers pass the training. This training saw 2 purposes for us. One, helped us up level the entire Yelp organization, the statistical knowledge of the entire Yelp organization. And second, help people empathize with the decisions that we were making, with the frictions that we were adding in the experimentation programs, and also help them understand why their workarounds weren't good enough. When 95% of the PMs passed the training, they were able to understand Bunsen internals and statistics better, and we saw an uptick in adoption. We also launched an experimentation deputies program, where we would pick employees from across the company and go through a 3-week experimentation training program and create experimentation champions across the company. These people would evangelize experimentation, and by doing this, we also created a Bunsen fan club at Yelp. A large part of experimentation happens outside the tech that you build, on Gmail, on Slack, on Google Docs, whatever productivity tool you may have. And all of this happens in an unstructured way, which makes it really hard for data science to provide feedback on the experiment design. To tackle that problem, we created a PEP, a product enhancement proposal. It's essentially a template which allows you to structure your experiment in a certain way that data science can provide you feedback in an efficient and timely manner. This helped us capture a lot of problems with the experiment design much early on in the process. The idea of PEP became so popular that we included design and research into it. Now, every single product that is created at Yelp is created on a PEP. Now, this is my favorite slide. This summarizes everything we've been able to achieve with the experimentation program at Yelp. When I joined Yelp, I partnered with data science to conduct a meta-analysis, where data science pulled a random sample set of experiments and dug into the statistical validity of those experiments and found out that only X% of those decisions were statistically correct. Needless to say, X is not something we're proud of. As you can see, PR did not let me quote those numbers here. But what I am proud of is all the investments that we made in the next 16 months. All of those investments led to a 118% improvement in the results from the net meta-analysis. In the post-Bunsen era, the probability of an experiment being statistically correct is 2x. How spectacular is that? So putting it all together, if you want to go from A to B, focus on 5 pillars. Establish a baseline, set out to integrate technically, boost trust in platform, faster time to value, integrate culturally. However, as is always the case, hindsight 2020, in hindsight, these have been my primary learnings. Focus on people, not just technology. People play a big role when it comes to experimentation and also platforms in general. If they don't know how to use the platform, they will figure out a way to break it. For me and Bunsen in general, Bunsen gave people the ability to compute metrics at an accelerated pace in an extremely easy way. So instead of using 5 metrics per experiment in the pre-Bunsen era, they started slapping 20, 30 metrics onto an experiment without realizing that that exponentially increases the false positive rate, and that it was also not being corrected for multiple comparisons. We tackled that problem with education. Second, build a measurement strategy early on in the process. You might notice often that people truly solidify their hypothesis during an experiment or after the experiment. And then this means you also change how you measure the experiment, which means you add on new metrics later or during the experiment, which invalidates the experiment. If you have a measurement strategy beforehand at an org and a product level, if you figure out what metrics you want to be measuring, you will already have the metrics in place, the logging layer and the logging for those metrics in place, and will be able to do a power analysis beforehand accurately. And third, finally, standardize the post-experiment process. This is something we caught on to late. In the real world, almost no experiments have a definitive yes or no. There's always some trade-off to be made. And all of these trade-offs are usually made in an ad hoc analysis that happens after the experiment is over on the experiment data. We standardized, added robustness in the pre-experiment and during experiment process, but did not look at the invalidation that was being caused in the decisions after that. To tackle that problem, we built a product called Bunsen Data Lab, which was essentially a combination of Jupyter notebooks and statistical packages that allowed people to do ad hoc analysis in a sound manner, which included multiple comparison corrections and so on and so forth. So before I open it up for questions, these are some of the FAQs I get all the time. These 3 are those questions. Let's dig into them one at a time. How can I drive platform adoption? You don't need to care about platform adoption. Jeez. You don't need to have a platform adoption strategy. Your users are paid to use the platform. If I had $1 for every time I heard that, I would be a millionaire by now. You do. Teams have pressures, priorities, and agendas. If you add hindrance, they will find a different option. Fit into their workflows, don't go away from it. But why is adoption hard? These are some of the things you might hear all the time. We already have a solution. We don't really need to look for something else. And also, I don't really understand what the benefit of your platform is. There's just too much feature work to do already. I can't devote any more resources this quarter for this. How can you tackle that? In order to help people understand that their workaround is not a good solution, you need to first understand what defensive or offensive value your platform brings for the team. Understand what the team is looking for. Defensive value is where you help them do something they're already doing faster or help them protect their moat. Offensive is when you unlock more potential for the team. You make something which is not possible before, you make it possible for them now. Understand where that value lies and pitch it using that. In order to help other teams truly understand the benefit, education is what I went to. Education via the experimentation training program, the Bunsen deputies program, this helped people understand why we were adding the frictions, why their workarounds weren't working. If people don't really understand experimentation, they won't understand why things are breaking. Use education when it comes to more technical topics like platforms. And finally, optimize the time to value. Most experimentation teams that I meet and advise are just primarily focused on building the optimal experimentation experience, like just having the most sound experiments possible. Very few truly think about the developer experience. People have different priorities and agendas. You need to make it easy for them to build on top of your platform. Optimize the time to value for them. Next up, how can I evangelize experimentation? You can summarize the stakeholders in your company in this pyramid: execs, managers, and individual contributors. Now, depending on how your company functions, you might want to go top down or bottoms up. Let's dig into all of these stakeholders and see what strategies can work. Individual contributors want to produce high quality results by contributing to team projects in an efficient manner. Some strategies that I've seen work with them: first and foremost, build great documentation. This is something which is underappreciated, not used as much. Building great documentation, treat documentation as a product. Help remove execution barriers, don't unblock them as much as possible. Stripe is a great example of what amazing documentation looks like. Secondly, there are people out there who want to learn about your platform, who want to become a part of your fan club. Give them the means to do that. Build educational programs. Education is a very, very powerful tool that you can use to educate people on the pros and cons of your platform. Third, build me a Bunsen and break me a Bunsen. These were engineering-led sessions, which I think did an excellent job in evangelizing experimentation at Yelp. This was essentially where we would invite external engineers to do a one-on-one system design exercise with my team, engineers on the Bunsen team, for two different kinds of sessions. One would be a build me a Bunsen, where we would do an exercise around how you could integrate your tech stack onto Bunsen and help you understand how easy or difficult it was for you. Or the other was a break me a Bunsen. This was for people who thought that Bunsen had vulnerabilities or could not satisfy all their needs. This would help us proactively work with external teams and identify what was missing and start building that early on. And finally, establish a support function, regular office hours and buddy programs. We started a buddy program where we partnered Bunsen engineers with teams who were creating their first experiment on top of Bunsen to make their process easy. Managers. Managers want to empower the team by setting clear priorities, removing execution barriers, and coaching ICs. Establish a dialogue with them early on. Conduct one-on-ones. If your company has grown beyond a point where you can do one-on-ones with all of them, set up an experimentation council. That's an approach that I followed, where I picked up managers from all over the company, which represented their org. We would meet monthly to where I would get feedback for them, tell them about where the experimentation program is headed, and this also helped them feel like their voice was heard. And when you pitch to managers, showcase wins from other teams and show them time to value. Managers are always very, very concerned about execution barriers. If you can convince them that your platform adds value to that, you can get that team onto the platform. So you can do a weekly or monthly experimentation newsletter in the company, which there's an asynchronous means of communication, which helps people stay in the loop and know where your program is headed. And finally, execs. Execs want to drive multiple teams to meet and exceed challenging targets. Align with their strategic goals. Understand what is their vision for the product, what is the vision for their organization. This will allow you to translate to relatable benefits such as person hours saved. Also showcase what value the platform will unlock for them. When you talk to execs, it's often about translating the technical benefits into the non-technical benefits. They're more concerned about the bottom line and come from a position of greater context. Be empathetic to that fact. Depending on the size of your company, you can do a weekly, monthly, or quarterly experimentation review. At Yelp, we did a quarterly experimentation review where I would present the stats of the experimentation program to the execs quarterly. And finally, provide exec visibility into what they care about the most at a company or and team level. One such example is this dashboard. I've blurred out the names of the teams. This dashboard essentially shows a trend line of experimentation happening at a team level. This almost gamified the process. This was a dashboard that execs looked at very, very regularly. This was for them to see how many experiments was every team conducting, and if you could map that to the quarterly impact that the team had had. And we did actually find out that the teams that were conducting more experiments were performing much better, and their metrics were improving by significantly better than other teams. And finally, should I buy or build? Unfortunately, I do not have a great answer for you here or a magical framework. My decision framework was simple: go for the cheaper option that satisfies all your needs. There are some things to keep in mind if you are looking to do a buy or build analysis right now. Understand what are your experimentation needs. Is there anything out there that can satisfy your experimentation needs? Secondly, do you have the in-house capability to build an experimentation program? On average, it takes about 5 to 15 engineers, 1 to 3 data scientists, plus an engineering manager and a product manager. Keep in mind, external solutions also require dedicated resources to maintain. External solutions don't come free. You need people to integrate, you need people to test, you need people for the proof of concept, you need people to maintain it as well. And finally, buy versus build are not mutually exclusive. You could buy some, you could build some. You could buy the logging layer, build the analytics layer, or you could build something else and buy something else. With that, I'd like to open it up for questions, if there are any.
Thank you, Rohan. I think it was really insightful here, and we really got to learn a lot about experimentation. I'm sure the audiences must have had the same experience.
I think Diksha is facing some problem with her mic today. We'll later fix that. Meanwhile, I was also listening to your presentation, and it's quite insightful, and especially from thinking from a foundational perspective. And I remember in one of your earlier slides, it's mentioned about when you came into Yelp, what were your first steps? And those first steps are actually the foundational problems, right? So maybe if you can share some light, maybe from Yelp itself, or your conversation with other experimenters from other organizations, what are those common foundational bottlenecks that that an experimentation professional has to face, and what do they do to resolve them?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest problems I've seen in the industry is that experimentation looks like one of those super simple, straightforward things to do, where you pick up 2 experiments, 2 different samples, 2 different cohorts, sorry, A and B, run an experiment, you see a metric, go up or down, and you can make a decision. Whereas the magic truly happens the devil truly lies in the details. Things can break. A lot of the fact that you think it's that simple is because a lot of people have abstracted away that complexity for you, which I think a lot of people don't appreciate. That's why it often becomes hard to get people to move on from their current experimentation workflows and help them understand what they're doing might not be the best possible alternative. One of the biggest problems that I faced at Yelp was helping people understand why looking at 20 metrics per experiment is not a good idea. That
Right.
leads to positives, that leads to metrics being all over the place, and we were not even correcting for multiple comparisons. And what's really funny is no one knew, most people, but by no one I mean most people, obviously the data science team was aware of this idea of multiple comparisons. But after we got done with the educational training and educational programs, everyone started speaking about multiple comparisons, not using more than 5 metrics, what the power analysis means, and truly were able to understand what a p-value stands for. And I think that was one of the most foundational things. If we started with this educational program later on in the process, if I had known how impactful that would be, I would have started with people first and the tech later. Does that answer your question?
Right. I was actually, that reminds me of a conversation that I was having recently with this one other person, and I think yes, in our last session with Karan Perry, he's the head of global user experience at Amazon Prime Video, and he had the same thing to share, that you don't really have to track a lot of metrics in order to gauge the performance. You just have to look at the few metrics which actually make the difference. You don't have to, I mean, if you were looking at 100 different metrics, and of course Amazon Prime Video does have a lot of data points to look at, you'll be basically falling into this this trap of analytics, what they call as analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
So it's really important to, even if you are getting a lot of data points, it's really important to fix your eyes on only maybe just 3, 4, or 5 maybe. So that'll definitely help you.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think an example of that I have from Yelp is when we came up with an idea of like guardrail metrics and started looking around the industry, like how do people solve this costume intelligence problem. So I set up a proposal, started doing a roadshow at Yelp to get buy-in, like exec level buy-in, and everyone was really excited about the idea. We sent out proposals for like what metrics, what operational metrics would their teams use, or what operational metrics would they want. And I want to say in like 2 weeks, we had over like 120 metrics. And I spent the next 2.5, 3 months in working with all of these execs to bring these 120 metrics down to 19 of the most important metrics. And getting alignment on what to measure was probably a harder task than getting alignment on like this building process, getting staffing and resourcing for this.
Super.
Yeah.
So it's I mean, I can imagine it is in itself a task to squeeze out the 19 metrics out of those.
Oh yeah.
100.
Yeah.
I totally imagine how difficult would it have been, right? So I hope Diksha's mic is operational again. Diksha, can you please confirm if your mic is working again?
Yeah, it is fine now.
Great. Yeah, please progress.
Yes. Okay. So, Rohan, we have Shilpa here who would like to ask a question related to Bunsen over here. So I'll quickly unmute her and then she can ask her questions. So give me a second. I'll.
Okay.
Yes, Shilpa, you can ask your question now if you can hear us.
Yes, Diksha, Rohan, can you guys hear my question?
Yes, we can hear
Okay,
you.
all
You
right.
can ask your question.
Okay, all right. Rohan, thanks so much for sharing. My name is Shilpa Mohanty. I have been a product manager at Groupon before, and have been involved in experimentation. I had 2 questions actually for you. One, first of all, I was very curious to understand why the experimentation platform is called Bunsen at Yelp. If you could share some more context there. And secondly, I was particularly interested in understanding how the handoff happened between the experiment owner, not the handoff exactly, but how, would an experiment owner and the guardrail metric owner engage? Because when I was at Groupon, one thing that I had noticed personally as I was working on the booking platform is that every time I would launch an experiment, let's say on one of our primary conversion driving pages, I would have to definitely speak with that page owner or the person who is owning conversion overall, just to ensure that my experiment does not negatively impact any of the conversion numbers. So I'd be curious to hear if there's a process that you guys follow at Yelp, or some of the best practices that you feel would make these conversations more seamless, and maybe make the pre-experiment analysis a little bit more, I would say, concrete, as these discussions may happen a little bit more async, and there wouldn't be any issues after the experiment has launched.
Yeah. So let me see if I got the questions correctly. One is why did we call the platform Bunsen? And secondly, how does this communication process between the experiment owner and guardrail owner happen? Like, how did they get notified about this? Is that correct? Shilpa, can you hear me?
Yes, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Perfect. So let me start with the first one. So why did we call it Bunsen? So when we started out, we were trying to create this entire like lab analogy with this experimentation program, where we were using the Bunsen burner was the actual like statistical package, but now it's like the entire experimentation ecosystem. And we also, the UI is called, the experiment creation UI is called Beaker. So we wanted to create analogies from the experimentation lab, but we eventually had to get up. We just didn't have enough analogies left, so we just moved out of that. This was something we wanted to do in the beginning, but there's no real reason to it. I think we're excited about drawing these parallels with an experimentation lab. And the second question on how the experiment owner and the guardrail metric owner engage is, so we understood early on that there was very limited cross-team intelligence. All of that was happening ad hoc. If someone would feel like their product was impacted by an experiment, they would ask data science to conduct an ad hoc analysis. And this would mostly happen if the ads product team would think that something's impacting ads revenue, and they would flag it for the team. So guardrail metrics were built from the ground up, keeping this collaboration and communication in mind. We knew this would only be effective if this was escalated to the right entities, given the right amount of visibility. We invested in an alerting layer, which alerted people at different phases of the guardrail. Like, violation is the highest priority, like now the experiment needs to stop or you need to make a decision, but there's like a warning tending to violation and violation and safe state as well. And very simply, experiment owner and guardrail metric owner both get emails when this happens, and there are other members of the team also who get emails, other execs and managers also who have visibility into these, group product managers and VPs. They also have visibility into what metrics have been impacted, what guardrail metric have been violated by which experiment. Helping people, ensuring that this doesn't just remain an email was more of a cultural change, where I got buy-in from the chief product officer, and that was more of a top-down change initially. But then when people gradually saw value in this, it became more of a bottoms-up thing. Now all ICPMs also do not ship experiments without ensuring that all guardrail metrics are in place. And it's almost become a process that when you get sign up on a product, do an experiment, but before you truly ship it, there's a product review session that happens at Yelp, where execs and managers, you present experiment results to them. They would always ask you for guardrail metrics, like which ones are violated, which ones are not. This helps them function. This helps them smoothen out this cross-functional experience, and also data science doesn't need to conduct ad hoc analysis. So to summarize it, I guess we added an alerting layer, made sure everyone got timely notifications, and brought a cultural change which was mostly top down to begin with.
So, Rohan, I have one question with you. I remember that while walking through your presentation, you have thrown some light with the tool referring to limitation with the number of sample size that is available. And also I've seen that you talked about the number of experiments and the significance level that we can achieve through that. So do you see any limitation with businesses where the number of audience or the number of sample size that is available for experimentation is less? So how are you going to work with those businesses, or what are the limitations that, maybe at Yelp on some of the other pages that you have experienced the same and you would like to share that experience with us? So there are two limitations that we have: sample size as well as the significance level, because it's very difficult to achieve a significance level also on those businesses with low sample size. So yeah, over to you.
Yeah, that's a good question. This is a question I get a lot, actually, and this is also a discussion we have internally all the time. And as you correctly mentioned, these are two problems. Anyone who's experimenting at a production scale is, if you're not a Google or Facebook, you almost run into these situations where you don't have enough significant sample size. As a matter of fact, I talk to a lot of people at Google and Facebook as well in independent teams, and they run into the same problem. So let's talk about both of these aspects independently. Firstly, let's talk about the sample size. So Yelp naturally has parts of the product which are much more mature, and then there are parts of the business which are relatively newer. Like, for example, a reviews product, where if we launch a change to how people see and read reviews, we get significance exponentially fast. But there are newer business lines such as Yelp Connect, where people can where restaurant owners can share updates in a video format, in a post format, with people who follow them. And in those business lines, we do not have adequate sample size. Either it takes us months to get significance, or we're just not able to achieve significance. So in these cases, I usually advise people to go down, do one of the two things. One, firstly, I really like how one of my colleagues put what experimentation is. He always says that experimentation is not a magical tool that helps you get results. It helps you minimize your risk. It gives you a directional sense. by no means is an experiment result, and it's your best guess of the future. It is not an accurate guess of the future, which is to say that these results will not be replicated every single time. Even if you do an experiment again, you might not get the exact same results. So what you're doing is you're minimizing results. So even if you don't, minimizing error, sorry. Even if you don't have adequate sample, you could do two things. One, do you have any past data to believe that this experience is good, or this experience has if you have any other data to be confident that this experience is not negatively impacting, that could put more weight on your argument of moving ahead with this experiment. Second is also like, if you look at your confidence intervals, you can get a directional sense on, let's say your confidence interval, even if your confidence interval is like really big, but a smaller percentage of it is behind zero and a larger percentage of it is like to the right of zero, which is to say there's a higher probability of this creating a positive impact. That gives you some directional sense that it's going to move to, it's going to be tending positive. So you can figure out, get some directional sense on that front. There are also other statistical techniques that you can use to get power or be able to make decision with like a smaller sample size, but I think that truly depends on a case. So assuming that's not a solution, see if you have any past experiments or past data that allows you to, that gives you evidence that this is a good thing to do. And secondly, get some directional data. I always feel that directional read is better than having no read at all. Secondly, let's talk about the significance aspect. Like when we don't have adequate significance. I think one thing to know about significance, like the industry standard is usually getting 80% power or a 0.05 p-value. And this 80% power is also an arbitrary number that has been picked up. Like there is still for when you talk about power, there is still a 20% chance of getting a false positive. This is an arbitrary number that's been picked up. You do not always have to go with 80% power. You need to make the best of what you have available. You can go with the lower significance. It depends on how you should figure out if it's a type 1 or type 2 decision, which is to say, if you make this decision right now, is it worth it? Is the cost of investing the additional time in making this decision worth the benefit that you get? Like, is it worth waiting those extra couple of months? Like, can you make a decision with 50% power or 60% power, let's say? Well, not 50, like maybe 60% power. In some cases, the outcome is not, the lower bound is not as bad, that you can go with lower significance as well and take the risk. Launch it and gradually follow the metrics. So you can slowly do a feature release instead.
Absolutely. I think we also have to evaluate what is the opportunity cost associated with that experiment and then take step accordingly.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I think this very well answers my question. I think by the time the audience is going to shoot in more questions, there's one thing more that I wanted to, while going through a presentation, I had a question was, so I know users or, the internal team members are very strong about the hypothesis or the features which are already existing, on the site or throughout the internal process. So would you like to share or throw some light during your experience when it was very difficult for you, maybe at Yelp, to explain the people that, this is the hypothesis that, or this is the experimentation that we should run? Or maybe if you would like to show us that change, you can do the same via screen sharing. Yeah.
So let me see if I got the question correctly. So you're saying, can I share my experience of when, like what were the problems we were facing with respect to like internal processes with experimentation and how we like standardize those processes?
With experimentation during the time that you were trying to explain that this is something that we should move forward with, but there has been a lot of reluctance from the other side, but somehow you managed to, maybe through your experience or through the experimentation, how it concluded, you managed to show the positive results.
Okay, so sorry, I'm not following the question. So positive results with respect to like why they should move on to Bunsen, why they should invest in a particular process, or just experiment in a certain way, like don't use this metric, use some other metric and say something.
Yeah, experimentation. Yeah.
Okay.
Only with respect to experimentation.
Okay, makes sense. So when we started, when I started early on, when we were building the new program, I was investing more time in like interviewing people, shadowing other experimentation teams, and also digging into experiments with them, which obviously like was initially to get a good understanding of where the baseline is, which over time sort of reduced, and I started focusing on more like measurement strategy at like an org level or like at a product level, as opposed to like digging into individual experiments. Because when we began, as I mentioned, it was unstructured. Information was flowing haywire on emails and like all over the place. People were not necessarily always using the best hypothesis or the best metrics to measure things. Firstly, large part of that was like educating people and helping them understand experimentation. So if they can't see what can go wrong, it's really hard to get a buy-in or hard to like sell them on that.
Yeah.
So after I conducted all of those interviews, it became very apparent that we need to invest in that education to help people have that basic understanding of experimentation. I think, and that is always the case with like super technical topics, that it becomes hard to get buy-in and sell people on that if they're not aware of the ways it can go wrong. With that, I was able to help people develop empathy on why they needed to invest in this. And secondly, when we started a PEP, we also streamlined this experiment review process. You could document, instead of just going haywire, we gave people a checklist where they could like document their process and they document their experiment design in a certain way. And we set up a process for data science to be involved in this much early on in the process, so that they can provide feedback on the design and work with the team to figure out how to optimally design the experiment. And product teams, when you talk about experimentation, product teams are mostly concerned about making the right decision in the most efficient possible time, where efficient possible time being the key here. Data science was there ensuring statistical validity and setting some expectations on like what was the best time you could, what was the most reasonable amount of time that you could make a decision in. And I think that was something where we always got pushback on, because people would rather choose like proxy metrics or choose a metric which may not be as effective for a particular experiment in favor of being able to make decisions much faster. So I think that is one problem that we face and tackle by involving data science much earlier on in the process and giving them an opportunity to review the designs much before people started executing on the experiment. I'm trying to think of a specific example where we did that. Nothing's coming to mind at the moment.
Okay, I think no worries. Maybe we can connect offline and we can get to know in detail later. So I would like to inform my audience as well that for furthermore queries, you can reach out to Rohan via LinkedIn. Rohan, can you just share the last slide so that if users haven't noted your LinkedIn, they can go through it once again? Yeah. So please feel free to reach out to Rohan directly for any other queries. And yeah, so I think this is it for today. Thanks again, Rohan, for a wonderful session. It was really inspiring to hear the Yelp story and your amazing contribution to Yelp's growth here. Also, thanks so much to all our audience today for tuning in live. All our past inspiring sessions are available to watch without registration. To visit vwo.com/webcast/ to watch all the past sessions and information regarding the upcoming ones. Have a great day, everyone. Stay safe. Wash your hands regularly.
Thanks, Deeksha. Bye.
Bye. Take care.